What if Zoro was taken in by Mihawk and raised by him from a young age on the Kuraigana Island and molded by Mihawk's swordsmanship? How would it change Zoro as a person, swordsman, and a crewmate? Shimotsuki village was quiet that morning, with the sun just creeping up in a blue sky. A scrawny green-haired boy was walking with swords in hands. One of those swords belonged to a kid named Roronoa Zoro. His rival, Kuina, had just passed away, and Zoro was leaving the village. He walked all morning and reached a remote coastal town. Then the mood shifted. A pirate crew had arrived earlier, tying up children near the docks, laughing loudly as they drank. People hid, afraid to speak, watching from behind doors and broken windows. Zoro wasn't strong, but he was fearless. He stepped forward, gripping his swords and shouting at the pirates. They overwhelmed him easily, knocked him down and tied him up with the others. The pirates returned to celebrating, drinking, and counting the money they planned to make selling children. Then everything changed. A single coffin boat appeared on the shore, drifting silently through the waves. A tall man stepped onto the sand, carrying a massive black blade. He didn't ask questions. He swung his sword once, then again, cutting the crew down one by one. He had learned what they were doing and decided to end it. Anyone would have been terrified by the sight, except Zoro. He watched, memorized, and burned the moment into his mind. When it was over, Zoro chased after the man, begging him to teach swordsmanship. The swordsman ignored him and turned away. Zoro attacked anyway, again and again, demanding training or death. The man finally stopped, looked down at the boy, and smiled with quiet interest. He had never seen such hunger before, and it amused him greatly, enough to pause briefly. Zoro was taken to Kuraigana Island. The land was empty and silent, cut off from the rest of the world. Zoro felt excitement at first, his chest burning with determination. That feeling didn't last long. When training began, Mihawk didn't even stand up. He remained seated, watching, giving orders without emotion. He didn't correct Zoro's three-sword style or force him to change it. He simply worked him until his body failed. Mihawk didn't care if Zoro was exhausted or bleeding. The training wasn't meant to be kind. Even Zoro began to feel it. Mihawk eventually said that if Zoro couldn't endure it, he was free to leave the island. Nothing was stopping him. One day Zoro snapped. He stormed into Mihawk's mansion and demanded a fight. Mihawk didn't draw his sword. He blocked every strike with a small knife he had been using to eat. Zoro kept attacking, his hands tearing open, refusing to believe he could be stopped by something so small. Then Mihawk hardened the blade. The knife shattered one of Zoro's swords with ease. Mihawk told him that anger and frustration would only hold him back. Zoro finally understood how wide the gap still was. Something in him broke at that moment. The childish part of him disappeared, and what remained was someone willing to endure anything to become stronger. Little did he know that was the foundation of who he became later. Zoro thought he understood defeat, but he hadn't. Not like this. The first weeks, his body broke down constantly. His muscles tore. His hands split open. He collapsed during training more times than he could count. Mihawk didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't speak unless it was to give another order. Zoro threw up. He bled. He woke up on the ground more than once and forced himself back to his feet. Others came to test him. Mercenaries looking for Mihawk's bounty. Beasts that live on the island. Swordsmen who wanted fame. Some Zoro defeated. Many defeated him. He was cut, crushed, and thrown down aside again and again. And still, he got up. Time passed differently in Kuraigana. Days blurred into wounds and swords. Zoro's swings became heavier. His footing stopped slipping. His breathing changed. The swords stopped feeling foreign in his hands. They felt like extensions of his arms. Mihawk watched from a distance. He never intervened. Zoro stopped talking. He stopped yelling. He stopped asking questions. He trained in silence, sharpening his blades until his fingers bled, then sharpening himself the same way. By 12, the losses came less often. He started seeing and understanding why he was losing and what he was lacking. He saw the path forward to improvement on his own. By 13, he could stand after fights that would have crushed him before. He wasn't the helpless kid who lost consciousness after a spar with a stronger opponent. He developed enough grit to endure the suffering. After every test, bodies filled the training yard while Zoro stayed upright, panting, refusing to fall. Mihawk sent stronger opponents, as if he was trying his best to break Zoro, physically and mentally. He didn't show an ounce of compassion or concern. He just wanted Zoro to go through hell. Zoro endured them. By 15, something had changed completely. The reckless child was gone. The boy who charged without thought had been beaten out of him. What remained was a swordsman who endured pain without complaint, a blade that bent but did not break. But even that didn't satisfy him. This awareness and newfound strength only showed him how weak he actually was. Zoro just kept on training, looking at Mihawk every day from a distance. He didn't speak to him, ask him anything. He just trained the way that he could. He fought opponents that came at him. He took more hits than the day before, got back up, and beat the opponent the best way he could figure out. And that training shaped him. Zoro didn't have a moment to rest or relax. He was simply moving from one fight to the other, and soon something inside him seemed to break. He endured and became tougher. He learned to dodge the swords better. He beat people who were a lot more experienced than him. He fought every person who came to the island to challenge Mihawk and collected a ton of scars in the process. In the later years, the baboons began to watch Zoro closely. They didn't rush him anymore. They stayed in the trees or along the cliffs, copying his stance with broken blades and sharpened bones. Every moment he practiced, they practiced too. At first, there were many of them. They attacked in groups, screaming and swinging wildly. Zoro fought them again and again. Some days he won. Some days he was driven back, bleeding and exhausted. Each fight left fewer baboons standing. Time passed. The island grew quieter. The baboons stopped mocking him and started hunting him. They attacked from blind angles, copying his three-sword style perfectly. Zoro was cut across the ribs. Another strike split his shoulder. He fell once, then forced himself back up. Then something changed. During one clash, Zoro moved before the blade could reach him. He didn't think. His body reacted on its own. Another strike came from behind, and he turned just in time, blade meeting blade, where he hadn't been looking. The world slowed and attacks began to feel predictable. The baboons pressed harder. One brought its blade down with full force. Zoro met it head on. His arm screamed, but the sword didn't break. The metal felt heavier, denser, as if his will had sunk into it. One baboon fell, then another. By the final fight, there were only a few left. They attacked together, perfectly coordinated. Zoro stood his ground. Every strike met resistance. Every blow landed clean. The forest shook as the bodies hit the ground. When it ended, the forest was still. Zoro hadn't taken a single step back. Only afterward did he understand what had happened. He had begun to sense attacks before they came. His blades no longer chipped or bent under pressure. It was the first awakening of observation and armament hockey. Even so, Mihawk was still far ahead. With nothing left to fight, Zoro wiped the blood from his swords and looked toward the sea. If there were no stronger opponents here, he would find them somewhere else. Years passed and Zoro turned 18. He didn't stay in one place for long. He moved from island to island, cutting his way across the seas. Pirates, marines, bounty hunters. Anyone who stood in his path with a blade was tested. Some fell quickly. Others pushed him harder. People started to talk. They called him the green-haired sword demon. Eventually, his path led him back to the East Blue. Zoro stopped briefly at Shimotsuki village. He stood in front of Kuina's grave, said nothing, and left again before the sun finished setting. Shell's town came next. The Marines surrounded Zoro as soon as he stepped into the square. Rifles were raised. Orders were shouted. Zoro didn't speak. He drew his swords and moved first. The first Marine charged. Zoro stepped past him and cut once. The man dropped before he understood what happened. Another rushed in from the side. Zoro turned and slammed the flat of his blade into the man's chest, sending him skidding across the ground. Gunfire cracked through the air. Bullets tore past him. Zoro kept moving. He cut through rifle barrels, split wooden stalks, and knocked Marines down with the weight of his swings. The square filled with broken weapons and bodies. More Marines poured in. Zoro was breathing hard now, but his stance didn't falter. He blocked a strike, countered, and dropped another man. Captain Morgan arrived late and furious. Seeing his men fall, he grabbed a nearby child and dragged him forward, pressing a blade to the boy's throat. He screamed for Zoro to drop his sword and stab himself. Zoro stepped forward anyway. That was when the ground cracked. A boy dropped from above and landed like a cannonball in the center of the square. Stone shattered. Dust exploded outward. Marines stumbled back, coughing and confused. Luffy didn't hesitate. He charged straight through the smoke, fists flying. One punch sent a Marine spinning, another folded a man in half. Zoro moved with him without a word. Blades flashed. Fists and swords tore through the line together. Morgan tried to strike again. He never finished the motion. When it was over, the square was wrecked. Marines were down. The child was safe. Zoro wiped his blades clean and looked at the boy who had jumped into the fight without hesitation. Something about him felt right. Zoro thanked Luffy for stepping in, but he said he didn't need help. Luffy asked him to join anyway. Zoro refused without hesitation. He said he wouldn't follow someone weaker than himself. Luffy didn't argue. He stepped forward and swung. Zoro drew a sword and blocked the punch cleanly. Another strike came. He turned it aside just as easily. Luffy rushed in again, fists flying, but every hit was stopped. Luffy pushed harder. He came in low, then high, trying to break through. Zoro adjusted his stance and shut him down each time. His movements were simple and precise. Then Zoro focused. Luffy felt it immediately. Every swing missed by a hair. Every opening vanished before he could take it. He couldn't land a single clean hit. The fight ended as quickly as it started. The gap was clear. Zoro sheathed his sword and turned away. He didn't join the crew, but he didn't leave either. Zoro didn't join, but he liked the idiot, so they traveled together for now. Orange Town was already burning when they arrived. A clown pirate laughed in the middle of the street, bombs exploding behind him as buildings collapsed. Civilians ran. Smoke rolled through the town like fog. Zoro stood back and watched Luffy charge straight in. There was no hesitation, no plan. Bugsy blasted him apart, limbs flying, and Zoro barely reacted before Luffy snapped back together and kept moving. Punches landed, explosions followed. Luffy took the hits, slammed back into the fight, and never slowed down. Zoro felt no pressure watching it, no tension, just motion. That kind of fighting was familiar. Not discipline like Mihawk's, not precision, something rougher, something that refused to stop. Cabbagee came at him next, blade spinning, riding a unicycle through the chaos. Zoro stepped forward and cut once. Cabbagee hit the ground before the crowd realized the fight had started. No flare, no mercy. That was when Zoro noticed Nami moving through the wreckage. She ducked the explosions before they happened, slipped past danger like she already knew where it would fall. She wasn't strong, but she was watching everything. Zoro didn't trust her. He didn't stop her either. Syrup Village came next, and it was too quiet. The streets were clean. The smiles felt rehearsed. Zoro stayed alert while Luffy ran ahead, loud and careless. The air felt wrong, not dangerous yet, prepared. When Kudo made his move, everything exploded at once. Zoro cut through Kudo's men without pause. He ended them one by one. Kudo himself was fast, controlled. Blades struck like needles. Zoro met him head on and pushed him back, forcing the fight to end where it started. Luffy broke through next, smashing through Kuro's composure with brute force and reckless speed. Watching it, Zoro felt the shift. This wasn't just chaos, it was momentum. When Usopp stood his ground, shaking, but refusing to run, Zoro finally understood what Luffy was pulling people toward. By the time they left the village, Zoro wasn't traveling alongside them anymore. The crew had formed, and without realizing it, Zoro felt that he could actually be a part of it. Zoro stepped onto the Baratie, already irritated. The floating restaurant cracked beneath his feet, packed with noise, laughter, and people pretending they belonged on the sea. He didn't like it. It felt soft. He scanned the cooks as they moved. Their hands were rough. Their posture was steady. Scars peeked from rolled sleeves. They weren't civilians. Then he saw Zeph. One leg, straight back, eyes that didn't flinch. The kind of man who had survived things. Zoro understood immediately why this place still stood. Luffy picked a fight with a cook not long after. Zoro watched from a distance as Sanji's kicks snapped out, sharp and controlled. Nothing flashy, just effective. Zoro didn't respect him yet, but he noted it. He stayed out of it. If Luffy lost to a cook, that was Luffy's problem. Then Krieg arrived. His fleet was shattered. Ships burned. Men crawled onto the deck instead of marching. Zoro felt it immediately. No pirate armada looked like that unless something worse had torn through it. Krieg talked too much. His armor was heavy. His eyes kept moving. a man who survived by running. When Zeph fed him, Zoro scowled. It made no sense. You don't feed enemies, you ended them. But Sanji's reaction gave him pause. The anger, the loyalty. Zoro respected that. When Krieg turned on the Baratie, Zoro wasn't surprised. He drew his swords without thinking. He wanted the fight to end. Luffy stepped in first. Zoro led him, but he watched. He watched Sanji refuse to leave Zeph. Watched Zeph accept death calmly. Watched the cooks stand their ground knowing they couldn't win. Something about it felt wrong. And then the air changed. The sea went still. The pressure shifted. Zoro felt it before anyone spoke. His hand tightened around Wado Ichimonji. Someone was coming. Someone worthy of killing him or being killed by him. Mihawk arrived without warning. A small coffin boat drifted beside the Baratie, carried by calm water that hadn't been calm moments before. The ship was untouched. The damage had already been done elsewhere. The 50-ship fleet of Don Krieg was gone. Mihawk hadn't come for the restaurant. He'd followed the Krieg pirates from the Grand Line out of boredom. Hunting them had been nothing more than something to do. When he stepped onto the deck, the air changed. Conversations died. Plates stopped clattering. Even the sea seemed to hold still. Luffy leaned over the railing, eyes wide, grinning like he just spotted something exciting. He bounced on his heels, completely unfazed by the pressure rolling across the deck. The cooks froze. Some reached for knives instinctively. Others stepped back. Zeph didn't move. He narrowed his eyes, studying the man with the black blade, then shifted his gaze to Zoro. Something like recognition crossed his face. Zoro felt it immediately. The weight, the silence, the pull in his chest. He stepped forward without hesitation. Mihawk stood calmly, his massive blade resting on his back, eyes sharp and unreadable. When Zoro faced him, murmurs rippled across the deck. Whispers spread. That was the green-haired sword demon. Zoro grinned. He asked why Mihawk was here. Mihawk answered simply. Krieg had fled. He had chased him. That was all. Then his eyes shifted to Zoro. He remarked that the swordsman had grown. The words were casual, but they carried weight. Luffy's grin widened. He stared at Zoro like he was watching something incredible unfold. Zoro didn't respond with thanks. He challenged him. Zeph exhaled slowly. So this was the man Zoro had been sharpening himself for. Mihawk studied him for a moment longer, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. The deck remained silent. Then Zoro made his move. Black spread across the blades immediately, thick and heavy, coating them in ornament hockey. The air tightened around him. Wado Ichimonji vibrated under the pressure. Mihawk's eyes narrowed slightly. So, he said calmly, you learned properly. Zoro planted his feet and rushed forward. The deck cracked as he moved. He twisted his body, all three blades aligning at once. The slash tore forward like a wall, layered with force and killing intent. Wood exploded behind Mihawk. The sea parted violently beyond the Baratie. Mihawk drew Yoru. The massive black blade met the attack head-on. The collision shook the restaurant. Railings snapped. Tables skidded. The shockwave forced everyone else to their knees. Mihawk slid back half a step before stopping. Impressive, he said. Zoro was already breathing hard. Mihawk stepped forward. One swing followed. Zoro raised all three blades, armament flaring to its limit. Black met black with a deafening crack. For a moment Zoro held, then the pressure broke through. The slash carved across his chest and sent blood spraying across the deck. Zoro skidded backward and stopped. Still standing, blood ran down his torso. His breath came rough, and then he laughed, a wild grin splitting his face. So that's it, he rasped. The gap. Mihawk looked at him fully now. He stepped forward again. Then something snapped through the air. A rubber fist stretched between them. Hey! Luffy landed in front of Zoro, arms wide, teeth clenched, eyes burning. Get away from him. The deck fell silent. Mihawk paused and looked down at him, amused. You stepped between a swordsman and his duel? That's my teammate, Luffy shouted back. Zoro was shocked that Luffy dared to stand in front of Mihawk, despite being so weak. Mihawk studied him. Your name? Monkey D. Luffy. And I'm gonna be the king of the pirates. The wind shifted. Mihawk smiled, genuinely this time. He glanced back at Zoro, then returned his gaze to Luffy. Stay alive, he said to Zoro. You have a captain worth following. He sheathed Yoru and turned away. For the first time, Mihawk left the fight unfinished. Zoro raised his blade and screamed, "This is going to be my last loss against you. Next time we fight." Zoro stood up in pain. Luffy helped support him, and Zoro said as he looked at Luffy, "Let's go, Captain." The Straw Hats kept moving forward. Island after island fell behind them, as Luffy led the way chasing the horizon. For a long time, Zoro was the strongest among them. When enemies appeared, Zoro ended things quickly. He didn't drag battles out. He didn't play with his opponents. Fights were over in a flash. At Arlong Park, the clash was brief. Arrogance met sharpened blades. The shark fell before he realized what had happened. Baroque Works came next. Zoro cut through the organization as if it were already broken. Tricks failed. Numbers didn't matter. Agents fell one after another. When he faced Daz Bones, there was no struggle, no desperation. Armament coated his blades, observation guided his steps. The steel body split cleanly, and the fight ended almost as soon as it began. Luffy watched it all. He didn't imitate Zoro. He couldn't, but he measured himself against him. Every charge forward carried the same thought. If Zoro could handle it, then Luffy could push further. So he did. They reached Enies Lobby. CP9 stood in their way, feared by everyone else. Zoro faced Kaku. The fight was fast, precise, controlled, but it never pushed him. The enemy lacked finality. The pressure never reached the edge. Zoro won. Nothing changed. They sailed away and something felt wrong. The world wasn't pushing back anymore. Then came Thriller Bark. For the first time in a long while, Zoro knew the test was coming. Zoro found his first real challenge beneath the pale moon of Thriller Bark. Ryuma stepped forward through the fog, blade drawn. His stance was steady. His strikes were precise. Every swing was meant to kill. Ryuma pressed forward, forcing Zoro to slow down. This wasn't a fight he could overpower. Timing mattered. Distance mattered. The Ryuma slashed low. Zoro blocked and countered. Their blades locked, then separated with a shriek of metal. The ground cracked as they moved. The gap showed itself quickly. Zoro pushed forward. His strikes grew heavier. Ryuma's footing slipped. One final clash rang out and Zoro cut him down. Ryuma fell, acknowledging the difference. Shusui was now Zoro's. Later in that arc, Kuma appeared. Luffy lay broken nearby. The crew couldn't move. Zoro stepped forward alone. Kuma attacked. A paw came down like a wall. Zoro met it head on, blades coated in armament. The impact split the ground. Zoro slid back and then struck again. His blade landed cleanly. Kuma cracked. Kuma didn't stop. Blows forced Zoro backward. His legs buckled. He fell. Kuma offered a bargain. Zoro accepted immediately. Luffy's pain crushed down all at once. Blood poured. Zoro's body shook, but he stayed standing. He didn't scream. When the crew arrived, the fog had thinned. Zoro stood in a pool of blood, sword still in hand. Sanji asked what happened. Zoro turned his head slightly and said, "Nothing happened." Sabaody felt different as soon as they arrived. The island was busy, but everything felt watched. Marines stood everywhere. People moved carefully. Things went wrong quickly. When Zoro cut down a slave trader, the man fell instantly. The crowd screamed and alarms began to sound across the island. Zoro knew what that meant. The first pacifista appeared, its heavy steps shaking the ground. The crew spread out, ready to fight. Zoro stepped forward immediately, blades coated in armament. The pacifista fired a beam. Zoro swung and cut through it, redirecting the blast into the trees behind them. The explosion scorched the area. The crew froze for a moment. They had never seen him do that before. The pacifista kept advancing. Zoro attacked again, blades biting into metal. Sparks flew as he carved into its body. It staggered but didn't fall. Luffy charged in, and together they brought it down after a hard fight. When it was over, Zoro looked around. More pacifistas were approaching. Then Kizaru arrived. Light flashed, and he appeared among the Marines without warning. Zoro felt the attack coming and raised his swords just in time. A kick of light slammed into his blades and sent him skidding across the ground. His arms went numb, and his chest burned from the impact. Around them, other pirates were defeated quickly, one after the other. They were overwhelmed. Then Kuma appeared. Zoro stepped in front of Luffy without thinking. His body was still injured from Thriller Bark, but he held his ground. One by one, the crew began to vanish. Zoro tried to move, tried to cut through, But Kuma's power didn't stop. The last thing Zoro saw was Luffy disappearing. The last thing the others saw was Zoro still standing, swords raised before he vanished as well. Zoro was sent back to Kuraigana Island, his body battered from the war, but his will hadn't dulled. Mihawk didn't ask questions. He simply told Zoro to stand. The training that followed was different from before. It wasn't about technique anymore. It wasn't about endurance. Mihawk pushed Zoro into himself, forcing him to confront the pressure that had been leaking out of him for years. At first, nothing happened. Then Zoro's anger rose. The air around the island shifted. The sea went still. The ruins trembled. Zoro's breathing deepened, each breath heavy and controlled. A dark pressure rolled outward from his body, cracking stone beneath his feet. The ground split as black lightning crawled out through the air. Mihawk watched closely, eyes sharp. Zoro's presence hardened. His will didn't explode, it compressed. His conqueror's haki took shape, violent and precise, coating his blades instead of spilling wildly. Each swing carried invisible weight, cutting without touching. Even the island seemed to bow beneath it. By the time training ended, Zoro no longer struggled to control it. He'd mastered it. When the world moved forward again, the seas changed. After the time skip, events unfolded much the same. The Straw Hats regrouped. Battles were fought. Enemies fell. But during Wano, while Luffy and the others were away, Zoro didn't hide. He didn't stay in the shadows, he cut openly. Wano was already burning by the time Luffy arrived. The rebellion had begun early. Smoke climbed into the sky and the sound of battle echoed across the land. Zoro was the reason. Stories had spread weeks earlier about a swordsman who wandered into Queen by accident and refused to back down. The clash shook the region. When it ended, Queen lay screaming, missing an arm and a leg, his blood staining the ground. Kaido had felt it from Onigashima, and he was furious. The name Sword Ashura spread through Wano like wildfire. Samurai rallied. Pirates hesitated. The war ignited faster than anyone expected. By the time Luffy reached the island, the fight was already at its peak. The final battle came beneath the storm clouds of Onigashima. Kaido descended first, his presence crushing the ground beneath him. Zoro met him head-on. Blades darkened, compressed and violent. The cut tore deep, far deeper than before. Kaido roared and staggered, forced back into his human form to recover. Before Zoro could press further, flames tore through the air. King intervened. The clash didn't last. Zoro stepped forward once, his conqueror's haki exploding outward and coating his blades in invisible force. One strike landed. King was cut down in a single motion, his body crashing lifelessly across the stone. The battlefield fell silent for a breath. Then Kaido rose again, and Luffy moved. Gear 5 ignited, and the sky warped as the two emperors collided. Zoro didn't watch. He turned toward the other battlefield. Big Mom towered over Law and Kid, her laughter rolling across the battlefield as their attacks slammed into her. Shockwaves rippled through her insides. She staggered but didn't fall. She swung her blade in a wide arc, forcing them back, her strength overwhelming, her presence suffocating. Then Zoro arrived. He stepped forward with his black blades. The air tightened. Black lightning cracked faintly around him, his will compressed and violent. Big Mom turned toward him, irritation flashing across her face as she felt the pressure hit. She attacked first. Her sword came down with a crushing force, aimed to erase him. Zoro met it head-on. The ground split beneath his feet as he held, then pushed forward, carving a deep line across her guard. Big Mom grunted, boots sliding back across the stone. It was the first time she had been forced to yield ground. Her smile faded. She struck again, faster this time, swinging low and then high, trying to crush him through sheer power. Zoro slipped inside the arc, his blades flashing as he cut through the air itself. The shockwave tore into Big Mom's side, forcing a roar from her throat. Law moved. His power twisted space, opening her defenses for a split second. Kid followed, slamming her with crushing force, pinning her footing just long enough. Zoro didn't waste the opening. He stepped in and unleashed a single decisive strike. Conqueror's haki, roaring outward as his blade tore through her guard and into her body. The impact shook the battlefield. sending Big Mom crashing backward, her weapon slipping from her grasp as she slammed into the ground. Dust settled. Big Mom didn't rise. The battlefield fell silent around her. By dawn, the fighting was over. Onigashima stood broken. 2 emperors had fallen. The next day, the world learned the truth. The Straw Hat Pirates were not like any other crew. They were the only ones who stood with an Emperor of the Sea and the King of Hell fighting side by side. Egghead was already in lockdown when they arrived. Sirens screamed across the island as doors sealed and searchlights swept through the sky. Marines flooded the outer zone. Drones circled overhead. Then CP-0 stepped in. Lucci moved first, quiet and fast, his claws flashing as he tore through the space between them. Kaku followed beside him, blade legs cutting clean arcs through the air. Zoro met Lucci head on. The first clash sent sparks spraying across the walkway. Lucci struck again, claws aimed for Zoro's throat, but Zoro twisted aside and answered with a horizontal slash that forced Lucci back a step. Kaku tried to flank. Zoro's observation caught it and he pivoted, blocking the kick with a blackened blade. The impact cracked the ground. Kaku flipped away, landing light, then rushed again. The fight widened. CP-0 pressed in with coordinated strikes, forcing Zoro and the crew to move, to split, to cover angles. Zoro kept his feet planted wherever he could, cutting down openings before they formed. Lucci lunged low. Zoro cut high. Kaku came from the side. Zoro turned and stopped it with a second blade, sparks hissing against armament. Then, the pressure changed. The Seraphim arrived. Heavy footsteps shook the lab floor as the childlike weapons entered. Eyes blank, faces calm, flames burned on their backs, and the air around them felt wrong, like the island itself had turned heavier. One of them moved and the ground shattered under its step. A punch came down like a hammer. Zoro raised both swords to block and still got driven backward, boots carving lines into the floor. The force rattled his arms. Zoro attacked immediately. His blades bit into the Seraphim's body and sparks exploded, metal and flesh resisting like armor. The cut landed, but it didn't drop. The Seraphim didn't even flinch. Another Seraphim fired a beam. Zoro sliced across it, splitting the blast enough to divert it, but the leftover energy still tore through the wall behind him, carving a glowing scar into the structure. The battles overlapped. CP-0 attacked in the openings the Seraphim created. The Seraphim attacked through everything, ignoring pain, ignoring fear. Zoro's observation kept screaming warnings faster than his body could fully obey. He took some hits, but he blocked the rest and ultimately got the upper hand. And then Kizaru appeared. He landed with the casual weight of someone who didn't need to hurry. His voice was calm. His presence wasn't. Zoro stepped forward anyway. His blades were covered in haki. Kizaru moved. A kick of light detonated where Zoro had been standing. Zoro twisted aside, then cut toward the shimmer, forcing Kizaru to shift again. Kizaru reappeared above him and struck down. Zoro blocked. The force launched him backward, skidding across the ground as his arms went numb. Kizaru kept coming. Light strikes rained from different angles, too fast to track with eyes alone. Zoro's observation caught fragments. Enough to move, enough to block, enough to stay alive. Zoro slipped inside one attack and swung upward. This time the blade landed. A clean cut across Kizaru's face. Blood spilled. A thin scar remained where light failed to escape. Kizaru's expression changed for the first time. Annoyance flickered behind the glasses as he touched the blood and looked at Zoro again. Elsewhere, Saturn had entered the battlefield. The Elder's form warped the space around him, and his pressure made even hardened fighters hesitate. Luffy met him head-on in Gear 5, fists stretching and snapping back with brutal force as Saturn retaliated with crushing blows that tore through the island's structures. Back with Zoro, Kizaru pressed harder. A barrage of light crashed down, overwhelming the area. Zoro was driven to one knee, breath heavy, chest burning, blades trembling under the strain. But he rose. Black lightning cracked around his swords as he lunged forward, forcing Kizaru back just enough to break the line and create an opening. Saturn staggered as Luffy landed a violent hit that tore into him, buying seconds, only seconds, but enough. The retreat began. Egghead burned behind them as ships moved out. When the smoke cleared, the damage remained. Kizaru stood still, a hand on the scar across his face. Saturn watched in silence, wounded and furious. The world government understood the threat clearly now. They had been watching Nika, but the King of Hell had already become a problem. they couldn't ignore. Oh, yes, and I am accepting donations in the form of subscribes.